that is based in Africa. And our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define correctly as one unified socialist Africa. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, which is portrayed, the cover is on the screen if you're looking at a screen, and you really should be if you can be, because there's a lot of information that we provide in these weekly workshops that we display. And Nkrumah's handbook articulated the strategy that we are using to achieve Pan-Africanism. So we talk about that a lot. If you want more information about that, we'll give you more information at the end of the program on how to become up on that work that we're doing. And our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week by myself. My name is Ajamu, and Shakura, who is my biological and ideological daughter, and we are both active organizers within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So to get us started, I turn it over to Shakura.
Greetings. Thank you so much. Appreciate you, sir. So, hello, everyone. We are here today to pay our honor and respects to some incredible African warriors who allowed us all to have a different perspective of just what humanity looks like, to give us a different idea of how to display humanity, even under a capitalistic regime, which is very hard to do. But when you are committed to your principles, you're dedicated to the revolutionary work and to advancing the struggle of people everywhere. As difficult as it is to resist capitalism, we know that there were great examples where Fred and Mark were both extremely disciplined in displaying that because they had a frame and a target set of why they were so interested in helping to advance the conditions for people. This is so important, and this is what we can start to really understand as we look more about what they were so dedicated towards and what kind of brought them into that dedication, because it's a skill like anything else that you have to develop. You don't just overnight, have the disciplinary actions in place to be able to resist capitalism. It takes years and years and years and years of practice. Why? Because capitalism has taken years and years and years and years and years of practice to continue to fine tune itself on how it wants to operate, how it wants to propagandize us, how it wants to inform us about things and not inform us about other things. So we understand that that's a committed thing that we need to keep working towards. And we also understand that it's going to continue to be a lifelong dedicated task that we'll have to commit to. And understanding that will allow us to kind of learn more, not just about Fred and Mark, but other comrades, other warriors who also were in this fight to do this work. And so just thinking more about how people are aware today that the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther leaders, so this will be Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, they were assassinated at 4 a.m. in Chicago during a police raid at their apartment on December 4th in 1969. 100 rounds were pumped into the apartment, and the actual shot that came from inside of the apartment was coming from a shotgun of Mark Clark, which was a reflex action from a fatal bullet that ended his life. A fatal bullet, excuse me. So Fred was injured in the initial attack and then was executed by police after they entered the apartment. Now, we already know, you all, that like every other African warrior, Malcolm X, we could even think about non-African warriors that were in organizations that were working to improve conditions for oppressed or colonized peoples, and really were working to enhance conditions for people everywhere, including their folks who were struggling. We can think about the American Indian movement. Obviously, there's so many examples within the Black Panthers, unfortunately, of this same thing playing out. But we understand that this has always been the intention of the United States government to find a way to infiltrate, to divide, to separate, to create division, to create disagreements, distrust, whatever that can be, so that the organization itself can get weaker and won't be able to manage itself, which means it won't be able to facilitate the same intentions that it's been doing. Now, we've given so many seminars throughout the years where we've explained different examples of this happening within different organizations. We can even think about some current examples of this happening and some of our sibling organizations on the continent, such as the Pan African Independent Party of Guinea Bissau. We can think about the police raids that are taking place there currently, and also in the past 6 months, and even last year, I believe. They had some police raids taking place. We can think about what's happening in the Western Sahara with our Polisario Front comrades. We can think about what's happening in Sudan and in Haiti, right? There's so many different examples of that. So I guess I'm trying to make the point that we already know that what happened was an intention of the US government to separate and to terminate the Black Panthers by any means necessary, because they were doing too many things that were resisting and weakening capitalism. And they simply had to be stopped, just like Malcolm X, just like the American Indian Movement, just like the PAIGC and Guinea Bissau, just like anybody else. Now, thankfully, we do have resilience with some of these organizations where they are still operating, they are still fighting, like the PAIGC. So they were not terminated. The success of the FBI and COINTELPRO was not successful with PAIGC. But I think it's still important to kind of think about how we know what we're up against at this point, which means this is why it's important for us to increase our political education, because if we don't know the facts, if we don't know the history, if we allow people to tell us stuff that they don't even have based on evidence base, then how are we to be able to trust the information that we're taking in? More importantly, how are we then able to take that information and pass it on to someone else if we don't even have confidence that it's based on evidence? How do we do that? How do you just share information that may not even be true with other people? These are the kind of things we have to think about. And I think it becomes really, really important to understand that, because a lot of people, I think, are afraid of increasing their political education because it takes too long to read a book, or it takes too much discipline, or maybe you don't have the skills that you want to read, or whatever that looks like. But the bottom line is, if you're not, first of all, searching from a credible primary source, first and foremost, then you can't trust that the information you're taking is in fact true. That's the first thing. The second thing is, assuming you are accessing it from a primary credible source, from then you can have more of a confidence that you know what you're talking about. Why? Because the things that supposedly happened are being articulated and communicated about by the people that they happened to. I was just sharing with my dad that I just finished this documentary on Hulu about who was responsible for the murder and death of Anime Pictoire Akwash. And you know that we've done several seminars on this comrade that was a member of the American Indian Movement. So we don't need to go into too much about them. But when I say pioneer warrior, like, that's an understatement to describe Anime. So you should definitely check them out and the work that they did, because they were instrumental and changing the world for all of us today. And we will forever be thankful for them for that. But I say that to say this: my dad had already watched the documentary, and he told me that the outcome was that they basically, the people who produced the documentary, were trying to place blame on the American Indian Movement as the cause of her death. And I just knew right away that we just can't trust that, right? I mean, it's too much of a coincidence that these things are suddenly being released by anonymous sources and things like that. And like I said, all the makings and the markings of how they describe this documentary, I just kept thinking of Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam. I just kept thinking of documents that were released way after it was completely eradicated that the Nation of Islam had anything to do with his death. And there were still documents coming out that were making people think that that was the case, even in cases where the FBI admitted that we were the ones that had something to do with his death and his assassination. And so I was thinking about the Panthers, I was thinking about AIM, and I was thinking to myself, the whole objective is to make the organization look weak. And the best way you can do that is by taking out leaders in these organizations, because then the organization won't be able to function. there's so many examples. We can talk about the death of Fred and Mark, but we can also talk about the division that was intentionally put with the FBI, with the intention of separating Huey P. Newton from others within the Black Panthers and making it seem like Huey was not to be trusted. That's the same exact approach that they took with Anime Pictoire, Aquash, same exact approach, where you want to make the rest of the organization feel like this person they can't trust after all these years of doing this organizing work together. And then they also would find people that looked like you and had them infiltrate the organization so that you did establish trust with them, only to find out that they were informants to the FBI, right? And so the whole reason I'm sharing all of this, you all, is this is only because I'm trying to increase my political education that I have these kind of examples to share. In my work study circle right now, we're reading Women in the Cuban Revolution by Fidel Castro and Vilma Espin. It's such an incredible book. Definitely would recommend that you check it out. And then maybe have other folks that you are close to read it as well and discuss different points with them, because it's such a beautiful book that really describes just how functional socialism can be in a world where people understand that all people need to have liberation. And that doesn't just mean liberation from colonialism, it means liberation from any oppression. So being educated so that you can earn a livable wage, so that you can afford to pay for things in your life, so that you can have liberated ideas on how you function, how you live, how you survive, instead of being under the oppression of someone else who's providing these resources for you. You should be able to decide how you're going to purchase what you need because you can have the authority to do so. That type of liberation is a unique skill set that not everyone shares. And this is why some people stay in marriages that they're not happy with, because they don't feel like they have the ability to go out and make their own decisions, advocate for themselves, have autonomy to do the things that they want to do. And that's exactly what Fidel and Vilma were trying to address, is they didn't want to continue to have people in Cuba facing those kind of conditions. So the first thing they did was they started figuring out ways to access more education so that people could have it dis- um, distributed to them. They would go into the communities and give them free classes. If they could sign up for a 7-week program, they would offer these classes in the communities, in the barrios, in the different parts, in the fields and whatnot. And so bringing up this book to say, these are some other examples of why the US implored the blockade in the first place, because they could not fathom the idea that Cuba was doing so well and was outshining them in every way necessary. And so I haven't gotten that far in the book, but I'm sure at some point we'll read about how even the US has found ways to sabotage the federation of the women's movement that they were talking about in the earlier chapters. And so just being able to understand that, we can move to the next slide, please. We can think more about what this really looks like, understanding that Fred Hampton had the chair of Illinois position, and then understanding how Mark's role was and what that looked like. Now, I mentioned COINTELPRO a moment ago, but we should just continue to think about just exactly how harmful that entire program and operation was, exactly how harmful it was, where we need to be able to understand that not anything that we're sharing, especially if we consider ourselves revolutionaries, is safe. It's not private. It's not protected. So, being able to understand that, back in the day, they can do this now too, but definitely back in the day, phones would be tapped, right? That was COINTELPRO. And so then they'd be able to capture little pieces of messages and then put them together and manipulate them so that somebody was saying something that really wasn't what they said, but they were pacing the messages together in a different way and then playing it back for the other members so that the members would be confused, because they would say, well, that's Shukora's voice, so why am I hearing her say this and this when that's not what she stands for? That's not what she's been speaking about this whole time that she's been in work study, organizing with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. COINTELPRO would do all kind of stuff like that. So it's also clear that we understand that so many people develop some understanding of how the US had a part to play, especially the US government, when it comes to the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and how they played a very big role, a big hand, if you will, in the murder of Fred Hampton and of Mark Clark. But they also had a big hand to play in killing so many other people. The FBI unleashed and uncovered an illegal campaign of terror against different African liberations that took place, along with other liberation movements. And this was resulting in the William O'Neill, an FBI informant who was basically setting up for Fred and Mark to be killed. And so we just have to kind of understand, you all, what's the purpose of these folks being murdered? Well, the purpose is you're trying to figure out the fastest way to weaken the organization. If you weaken the organization, then people will go back to thinking that capitalism is the only way, because organizations like the Black Panthers are teaching us that socialism is a very viable and successful solution that we should give a shot to. And so if you find a way to weaken that, then you can reprogram and re-propagandize people to think about how capitalism is really the only way. I don't know what I was thinking, excuse me, thinking that I should support socialism. When I support socialism, I see murder and jail as an outcome. But if I support capitalism, then I'm more likely to live unharmed. I'm more likely to not live in fear that somebody would come and arrest me. And I think that ultimately, what we're talking about is you all have to understand that the systems we live in are not designed for us to think for ourselves. That's literally the whole point of all of this. If you're in an organization that's working for justice, that means you are resisting against the same system that is trying to trap you, the same system that is trying to tell you what to think and how to think and when to think it. So if you are to push against those kind of things, understand that there's going to be consequences, because you're not supposed to think for yourself in this society. You're not supposed to think on your own 2 feet. You're not supposed to think independently. You're not even supposed to have your own ideas. And to some extent, you don't, because propaganda basically frames messages and communicates things to where your brain is now starting to consider these messages, and you're thinking that you have come up with that thought, but you really haven't. It was a suggestion that was already given to you. This is why when you watch commercials, you're streaming a show on Peacock and you watch commercials and the Burger King commercial comes on and you think to yourself, oh man, I haven't had a burger from Burger King in so long. Next thing you know, you're passing down a Burger King street, and what do? You turn your signal on so you can turn in there and go get you a burger. That wasn't you thinking that you wanted a burger. That was capitalism trying to manipulate having your dime so that they could ensure that they could get your money. That's what that is. And just like Target, Nike, they all do it. Starbucks, they all do it. So don't think that your thoughts are independent. They are not. That's precisely the problem. That's what we need to start pushing against. That's what we need to start thinking more clearly about. We need to start being very critical of that. And so being able to understand that, I think, is ultimately the best thing that we can do. I watched a movie the other night on Peacock, and it was called Speak No Evil. And I'm not going to give out the premise, especially if people want to watch it for themselves. But I will say that the literal point of the movie, which I was very impressed with, the literal point of the movie was to highlight that for so many people, they find it very difficult to speak up and speak their minds. And so, because they find it difficult to do that, it's very hard for them to tell people no. It's very hard for them to think independently. And even if somebody is suggesting they do something that they don't want to do, they have such a hard time saying no. So instead, they will just go along with it. And the producers of the movie wanted to capture that. They wanted to highlight that for some people, it is easier to just go with something, even if you don't want to do it, than standing up for yourself and telling somebody no. And I can understand how that would be challenged, because I think when you live under capitalism, when you live under white supremacy, when you live under patriarchy, you're doing your best. Ableism, homophobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, you're doing your best to exist, and you're trying not to ruffle feathers. You're trying not to get people upset. But at the same time, though, what has that gotten you? Because now you're being forced to do stuff that you don't want to do, stuff that makes you uncomfortable. And the biggest lesson that I took from the movie is now your life is in jeopardy because you didn't decide to say no when you should have said no in the first place. The minute they said something to you that you didn't think was appropriate, you should have said, no, I'm not comfortable with that. And then you should always be always ready, because anything can happen where your life might be in jeopardy. We don't live in a safe environment. That's another point that the book made, Women in the Cuban Revolution. They talked about how they leave businesses open later in Cuba, hair salons, for example, because they're trying to increase the working class women and non-male population so that they can have more liberation and more freedom, like I said. But they also said that rape and violence is at an all-time low compared to the US. And so it's not a problem for non-male people in Cuba and women to walk around freely at night. They don't even feel endangered or threatened to do so. And that's just amazing to me, because that's not the reality in the US. And they talked about that. And so I'm making the point, especially if you live in the US, this is not a safe place. It's not a safe place if you are a non-male. It's not a safe place if you are of color. So being able to speak up for yourself, being able to think for yourself, being able to stand by the thoughts that you have, and being able to confidently say, no, I don't believe in that. This is what I believe in, and this is why I believe in it. That is the best weapon that you can have besides another physical weapon. But being able to literally think independently of what people are telling you to think, it could very well save your life one day. And if you have the ability to develop that skill, then I think you would be a good candidate for joining an organization that works for justice, because we need more independent thinkers. That's the best way to threaten capitalism. Ashe.
Thank you. Thank you, Obrigada, Asante Sana. And I'll just start my section by saying, as we always say in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the masses of people make history, not individuals. The masses of people make history, not individuals. And so the reason why that's important is because I think a lot of people look at like the murder of Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, Patrice Lumumba, Anime Akwash, Thomas Sankara. I think, and I believe that Frantz Fanon and Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Touré, I believe they were assassinated. And I would love to, at one point, we will probably do a session on what our evidentiary perspectives are on why we believe that. But the point is that people look at these folks being taken from us as these are these great individual leaders, and we've lost them. Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King, et cetera, and so forth. And so because we don't have all of these people anymore, then that's why we don't have a movement. And if you think anything close to that, then you're thinking exactly like our enemies want you to think. You're doing exactly what they want you to do. Because what they're really intent upon is forcing people to believe this individualistic logic and to get people not to receive the correct perspective, which is that the masses of people make history. And so their efforts in killing these individual leaders are not just designed around getting rid of the individuals, they're really designed around ensuring that the masses don't act. And so that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of the program, is how they have engaged in these assaults against our leaders, the methods they use, the methodology, and why that methodology was designed to send a message to the African masses in particular, that if you go up against us, this is what will happen to you. And I would argue that over the last 50 years, that message was heard loud and clear by African people in this country. And we'll illustrate why we say that. But the point is, again, their objective isn't just to kill and discredit the individual activists, although that's certainly a part of why they do the things that they do. But it's mostly to intimidate the masses from getting active. That's what they want to do. And so this is illustrated by why they dragged Fred Hampton's body onto the street in front of his apartment building after they murdered him. And they left his body out there. It's illustrated by how they had a public hanging of members of the National Congolese movement in the Congo. and they dissolved Patrice Lumumba and Maurice Impolo and Brother Akoto's body in acid, and they allow people to watch them doing that. As sick as that is, this is why they did that. This is why Malcolm X was assassinated, not in front of his house, not while he was going to get some fish and French fries, but in front of his audience at the Audubon Ballroom at a very public event. That's why it was done there. That wasn't an accident. That's why that happened the way it happened. That's why Anime Pictar Aquash's her hands were severed from her body. These things were done to terrorize people. And that's exactly what these things were done. Thomas Sankar's assassination was done in a very public way so that people would know. They wanted people to know that these things were happening. They wanted people to know that these people were stopped and that they were killed. And this is the reason why the US capitalist imperialist system is so focused on Assata Shakur. Assata Shakur is a woman around 70 years old. And yet they act as if she's leading an army to overthrow the US government. You can't say they don't act like that. They've got a $2 million bounty on a 70-year-old woman's head who hasn't participated in movement activity in the United States in 50 years. But yet, to them, she's a major threat because she got away. And as long as she got away, and not only did she get away, she got away and went to socialist Cuba, a socialist country. So these are all very threatening things to the US empire. And that's why they put so much effort into trying to get her back. And it also explains why they kill our freedom fighters the way they do, because they want to make sure that we receive the message that if you go up against us, this is what will happen to you. And if you think about political consciousness in this society among the African masses, the 50 million Africans that exist within the United States of America, you can't argue that their strategy has not been effective. I know that when I was going to college, I immediately joined the Pan-African Student Union at the community college I went to in Fresno, California, and at the university I attended here in Sacramento. And it was at the university here in Sacramento that I joined the All African People's Revolutionary Party 40 years ago. But while I was still a student, before I joined the APRP in May of 1984, I was very active in campus activism, and we were extremely radical and militant. I can show you a picture of where we disrupted when Eldridge Cleaver, the former Minister of Information for the Black Panther Party, who really cannot really effectively be argued that he was someone that needed therapy, and saw, and I would argue, saw our movement as a revenge mechanism for him being incarcerated for raping African women. I mean, that's not my opinion. He wrote about raping African women in his book, Soul on Ice. This is why it's so important to study, you all, because it's very difficult for people to talk people like me down on these subjects because we've done the work. We know what we're talking about. So Eldridge, after he, did whatever he could to sabotage the Algerian Black Panther Party international section, then he went to Paris for a while, and then he came back. There are people that were killed in Algeria around him and his individual ego and all of those crazy things that he was doing. And he came back and he joined the Unification Church from South Korea, which at best was a cult church. He made pants that had a penis pocket in them. And then he joined the Mormon Church. And if you don't believe me, there's a video of him on YouTube today where he's speaking to the Mormon Tabernacle, and he's talking about how he supports Ronald Reagan at that time in the 1980s for president, and just all the things that he did to sell out the movement. So when he came to our campus here, he was brought here by the Unification Church because they, at that time, he was affiliated with them. We went and told those people, don't bring him here because the only reason why you know him is because of our movement for liberation. And he has betrayed that movement. So we take it as an insult for you to bring him here. And the South Korean students told us, well, no, we respect what you're saying, but we will bring whoever we want. And we told them, okay, that's fine. What we didn't tell them is that your event will never be completed. And we had a strategy, and we went in there and we sabotaged the hell out of it. The man was not able to speak, and he had to get the hell out of the campus, and he never came back. And that was our objective. And so I was very involved in those kind of radical activities. So by the time that I came to be looking at the All African People's Revolutionary Party, I had already studied enough to know that I believed in socialism. I had already studied enough to know that I knew that our problem had to be resolved on an international level. I didn't understand Pan-Africanism the way I understand it today, but I knew at least that much. And I had already been, because we wrote a number of plays, we were incensed at the level of US military activity on high school and college campuses. So I wrote a play encouraging our youth not to join the US military. And we did the play at a couple of high schools here in Sacramento, and they liked it so much, they started finding us bookings to do the play. And we did the play in a number of locations. And so by the time that I was just barely 21 years old, I was getting visited by the FBI about these plays, talking to me about how I would not be able to go to law school because I had qualified and was accepted at the University of California, Berkeley Law School. I thought at that time that's what I wanted to do. Clearly it was not, but I was 21. I didn't know any better. And so I thought that was what I wanted to do. And these Gestapos came to my apartment and told me that if I did not register for selective service, if you were 18, you had to register to be eligible to be drafted into the US military. And I refused to do it. All of us in our Pan-African Student Union, we talked about it. We refused to do it. And we had events where we were telling people not to do it and that we didn't do it. And we burned the selective service cards like our ancestors burned the draft cards in the 60s. And so these Gestapos came and they told me, well, you know you're not going to be, we know what your parents' financial condition is. They told me this to my face. We know you can't afford law school. There's no way in hell you're going to be able to go there if you continue these activities. But if you sign up for this selective service, and if you stop doing these plays, then you're probably going to be eligible for a ton of financial aid. And I just basically told them, yeah, no, thank you. I have nothing to say to you. And of course, I never signed that damn form. And I never qualified for financial aid. And I never went to law school. And that was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. But my point in all of this is that the radicalism was there. But what happened is my parents and everybody around me, my family, friends even, at that time, they were like, you're crazy. You're insane. You got to stop doing all this black stuff. You have a chance to set yourself up for a wonderful and comfortable life, and you're selling it all down the river for this black power stuff. This is what my parents and my family were saying to me. And even some of my friends were saying that to me. And they said it to me. I remember my mother told me, and this is the last part of this that I'll mention. My mother is from Monroe, Louisiana. And if you know the history, you know Huey P. Newton, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, was from Monroe, Louisiana. And you know that Monroe, Louisiana, if you look at it back in those days, the 40s was a very small town. Only several thousand people lived there. And my mother was so anti political that I never even mentioned to her about Huey P. Newton because I figured, that was a waste of my time. But I called her after I joined the party, and I told she's, "What are you doing?" Like, "Well, I'm getting ready to go to the airport. I have to pick up Kwame Ture." And she's like, "Well, who's that?" I'm like, "Well, he used to be Stokely Carmine." And she just went off, cussed me out. You stay away from that man. That's gonna get you killed, fooling around with that man." And I was not even close to being prepared for her going off on me like that. I mean, I had worn, I've always worn political clothing that represented our movement. I wore Huey P. Newton shirts, I wore Kwame Ture shirts, and she never said a word. Now she's been dead for a number of years. Now I've come to find out that she grew up on the same block as the Newton family, and they knew each other. They watched each other's children. She knew, there's no question that she knew Huey P. Newton as a child. And because of that, there's no question that she knew the Huey P. Newton that started the Black Panther Party for self-defense and became the international leader of the Black Panther. There's no question that my mother knew this man personally. But we never had a conversation about it because she was terrified of what it meant for me, her son, to be involved in these activities. And that didn't come, like Shakur said, that didn't just come out of the sky. That came from this coordinated effort by these criminals to terrorize our people against supporting any independent movement that was focused on achieving our liberation. And if we continue upon, this analysis, the capitalist system, they always work to discredit our freedom fighters. They want to tell you that they want to talk to you about Patrice Lumumba being a postal worker before he got involved in the Congolese independence movement. And he was arrested and convicted of taking money out of the mails in the Congo. But if you know the corruption in the Congo, you know that as a civil service worker, his pay was so low that people have to figure out a way to survive. And that's all he was doing, was trying to find ways to feed his family because the corruption of the pay was so low. There was no low pay for the people who were stealing the diamonds and the at that time the uranium to build the atomic weapons. They got paid hand over foot, but the masses of people in the Congo got nothing. So people have to be creative to try to find a way to live. But today, these thugs want to tell you that he stole money. I don't give a damn if he stole money out the mail. I wish he would have gotten away with it. They want to tell you that Malcolm X was immoral. Manning Marable wrote that book. I read it. That's why I can talk about it. He wrote that book that had all these allegations against Malcolm X, that he had an affair with a European woman in Cairo, Egypt in December of 1964 called Fifi, and that Malcolm went to Fifi's room. That's what this man wrote in this book. No evidence, no witnesses, no nothing. I mean, I don't care whether it was true or not. That's not, if you're focused on that, well, how do you know it's not true? I don't give a goddamn if it was true or not, because I don't know who Malcolm X is because of Fifi. I know who Malcolm X is because of the work he did for our liberation and forward progress. But my point is that our enemies are cold focused on attempting to discredit the people who make contributions for us. They want to tell you that Ernesto Che Guevara was a racist because of some stupid stuff he wrote in his motorcycle diaries when he was 22, 23 years old, before he gained his political consciousness. And a lot of people want to believe, I see Africans that, well, he was a racist. Why are you wearing his shirt? Well, you said that because he used the N-word, you used it 5 minutes ago. I'm sorry, I'm not one of these people. I think if you're African and you use the N-word, you're a big part of the reason why our oppression continues. It's your goddamn fault. I'm sorry, I'm not one of these liberal people that, well, it's just a word, because the way I experienced it wasn't just a word. It was life or death. And because you experienced it sitting around drinking and bullshitting, You don't understand the proper context that the masses of our people experience that oppression, and you think the world evolves off the end of your goddamn nose. So you think that, well, because this is how I experience it, that's how it is. Well, that's not how it is. So we know that we're not concerned about what this man said when he was 22, 23 years old and dumb as a barnyard animal. We're concerned about what he did when he made a commitment to fight for humanity, when he went to Africa and risked his life fighting for Africa, when most of the people criticizing him wouldn't risk a fingernail clipping for anybody other than themselves. You are not in the moral position to influence us to criticize this great freedom fighter. But this is what our enemies put out there. These are CIA talking points about Che Guevara. And when those types of lies don't work, and they don't for those of us who are paying close attention, they only work for the slim-minded people out here, but for people who are paying attention, they don't work. Then our enemies go to another strategy. They start using deceased comrades against our living comrades. And they've done that for decades. They used Che Guevara against Fidel Castro when Fidel was alive. Che Guevara was killed and assassinated in 1967, October. Fidel Castro lived until 2016. And that entire time, every day, the CIA was cooking up this scheme to convince people that Fidel Castro sold out Che Guevara, and that was the reason why Che Guevara was assassinated. And I've had people tell me that for decades. And every one of these people that said that hadn't studied a single thing about what happened in Cuba. They didn't know anything about the contradictions. When I told them about it, they didn't even understand what I was talking about. They didn't know the evidence is clear that even though Fidel did his best to talk Che out of the theory of going to Bolivia and out of the FOCO theory, if you don't know what that is, you should study it. But he tried to talk him out of that, and Fidel or Che would not listen. And so Fidel did everything he could to support the mission in Bolivia. He performed the same tasks for Che's mission in Bolivia that he performed for Che's mission in the Congo, that he ended up performing for the 500,000 Cuban troops who fought to liberate Southern Africa in the 80s and 90s. He performed the same role for all of those military excursions, and it's well documented. So we don't want to hear all that stuff, but this is what they try to do. They try to turn Malcolm against Louis Farrakhan and Elijah Muhammad. And I mean, I wouldn't be here if it were not for El Hajj Malik El Shabazz Malcolm X. That is my ideological father. There is no question in my mind about that. So, of course, I feel a certain way about how he was treated in the Nation of Islam. But at the same time, revolution is objective. And we know that these efforts to use Malcolm to turn him against Louis Farrakhan are strategic imperatives by our enemies to turn us against an organization that, if I say I'm here because of Malcolm X, I have to also add I wouldn't be here if it were not for the Nation of Islam. Because where I grew up, nobody was coming there to talk to us as kids. No Democratic Party was coming to our neighborhood to talk to us as children. None of these goddamn people today on social media would have stepped foot in my neighborhood to talk to us as children. But the foot soldiers, the fruit of Islam, were there every day talking to me. And I realized as a child, like, I wasn't interested in joining their cause, but the way that they informed me helped open me up to join the cause that I've dedicated my life to. So I have to say that about them, that they played a critical role in that. And even no matter how I might feel about what happened to Malcolm, I have to respect Louis Farrakhan being in the organization for 60 years. And there's no way in hell those of you that haven't been in an organization for 60 seconds are going to turn me against somebody like that. Whether I agree with this program or not is 100% irrelevant. Sorry. Kwame Ture against Sekou Toure. They want to talk about how Secretary was a dictator in Guinea-Conakry, and Kwame Ture was basically under house arrest. I've read books that imply that, including Pernell Joseph's book on Kwame Ture, Stokely of Life. He kind of suggests that Kwame Ture was kind of handcuffed in Guinea and couldn't criticize Secretary. I've read all this stuff. I'm not making it up. And none of this is true, but this is what happens, you all. And Anime Aquash against Wabi and Ini, or formerly Vernon Belcourt, and John Trudell, trying to accuse those strugglers for justice for the indigenous people and accuse them of murdering Anime Aquash. And they talk about this like, look, understand me clearly. I am not saying that people who were members of the Nation of Islam did not pull the trigger and kill Malcolm X. I am not saying that people who were members of the American Indian movement did not pull the trigger and shoot Anime Aquash in the head. I'm not that stupid. I'm not that shallow in my analysis. I understand what happened better than those of you that are talking to me about it. What I'm saying is that you got to ask deeper questions. Where did this fervor against Malcolm X come from? Where did this insinuation that Anime was a police agent come from? It didn't just come out of the air. It didn't just come on its own. It didn't just come in a vacuum. It was facilitated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation with the intent of achieving the objective that it achieved, of allowing our revolutionary activists to be killed. The FBI never does the killing themselves. They always use surrogates to do it. This is why the day after Malcolm X was killed, read the FBI files. The FBI agents that were working on sabotaging and creating the division between Malcolm and the nation, all of them got cash bonuses. Why the hell would they do that? Just because they were just happy he was killed and they just, well, let's throw some money out here? No, because they did the work to create the division that caused him to be killed. They did the work to spread misinformation that inflamed people that wanted to kill him. They did that. They did the work to turn people against these genuine activists. So that's why we say that they may not have fired the weapons, but they bought the bullets. And so what we need more of, because we're not running away from the fact that, you know, these activists in the organizations turned on the activists. This is what we say to you every day. This is why we need organization and mass organized and disciplined ideological training and political education. That's why we need that. Because when we have that, it will be much harder for our enemies to influence our thinkings and derail us from our mission. It'll be much harder to do that. And we did not have that in the Black Panther Party. We did not have that in the Nation of Islam. We did not have that in the American Indian movement. I don't care if people get mad at me for saying that. It's irrefutable. And even the honest activists who participated in those organizations have said that. I've read all the books by the Panthers, and all of them mention that. Geronimo G. Jaga talked about it in his book, Last Man Standing. Assata Shakur certainly talked about it in great detail in Assata. Even David Hilliard in his book, This Side of Glory, talked about it. Bobby Seale talked about it in Seize the Time. The brother Forrest Forbes talked about it in his book, where he was a part of Huey Newton's hit squad. They all talked about it, you all. And so Elaine Brown certainly talked about it in A Taste of Power, that because there was so much confusion about what was the correct path, it was easy to derail people, and people got into organizations for the wrong reasons. And so this is what an organized and disciplined political education process is designed to ferret out. And that's why we need that. And if we don't have that, it's going to happen again. This kind of stuff is going to continue to happen. We will rise up There will be plenty of that come 2025. We'll rise up when this fascist comes in and this criminal, this thug, and this capitalist comes in there. A lot of you will be moved to rise up, but you won't have any discipline. You won't have any training. You won't have any ideological training, at least. You won't have any of that. And so the minute they send somebody in there to act a fool, you get all caught up in that. And then you'll get out of the work and you'll spend the rest of your goddamn life telling people, well, I used to do that work, but I got out of it because, it wasn't really productive for me to be in it. It just caused me stress and people aren't really serious. And no, that's not what happened. What happened is that you were not serious about it. And so the people who are more serious about it than you are, they manipulated you so that they could use you as a tool to turn people against mass political work. That's what happened. And that's what will continue to happen until people start getting serious about getting engaged in organized political education and work. And to close, we have a picture there of the screen of one of our work study circles there in Azania, or what you call by the colonial name, South Africa. And we have work study circles like that all over the world. You have to participate in them. Shakur is always talking about her study. She talked about the book she's reading, her and her group are reading right now. And I have a cadre circle. We're studying right now. We're reading about women in Africa. And every active person in the APRP is a part of a study group. And it's not just reading, it's about ideological training, criticism, self-criticism, understanding the proper implementation of democratic centralism, not the way people talk about it in the backward United Snakes of America, but the proper implementation. These are the things that will make us much less susceptible to this type of sabotage against our movement. So we want to thank you for joining us. We invite you back next week. Please come back Sunday, December 15th. We're going to be talking about AIDS and Africa, and specifically talking about Africa and AIDS in 2024, 2025, and beyond. What's the update on it? If you remember, there was so much sabotage, blaming Africa for AIDS in the 80s. And then, of course, Africa had a devastating impact, or AIDS had a devastating impact on Africa. So we want to give an update on that today. The QR code in the upper left, you can see all of the APRP programs. It's December. Y'all know you celebrate these imperialist capitalist holidays. So if you're going to buy presents for people, go to the Forward Ever shop, which is in that QR code, and buy revolutionary clothing. Buy a hoodie that says One Unified Socialist Africa. Buy 10 of those and give them out at the Christmas dinner or whatever the hell, Kwanzaa, whatever you're doing. Give those away as Kwanzaa presents. That's how we begin to allow you to do what you're doing. You can do whatever you want, but do it in a way that advances our people, because you can rest assured that we are using the money from your purchase to advance the work to liberate Africa and African people. Hoodcommunist.org. Go there, read that revolutionary Pan-African blog, join the APRP at aprp-intl.org. You can donate to the AAPRP at Venmo at A-APRP, or PayPal at AAPRP no dash. The QR code in the bottom right, Burkina Books. Become a monthly sponsor. Support Pan-African work on the ground in Africa, in the hot Sahel region of Africa. You have the opportunity to do that. So please do so. Even if you can't give but $10 US a month, do that and be dedicated to that. Like you're dedicated to paying Netflix every month and going to the dispensary and whatever the hell else you do. Have some equal dedication for our people's struggle for justice and forward liberation. And buy my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. It's there on the screen. Jamu Umi. You can only get it through Amazon. If you don't want to get cussed out, don't bring that issue up to me. If you have a problem with Amazon, I got a problem with every capitalist organization. But if you can't tell me how to get the book published and shipped to the people that order it, I don't want to hear what you have to say because you're not contributing anything. All you're doing is talking about your idealistic, the idealistic confusion between your ears. And we're not interested in that. We're trying to get work done here. We're trying to get work done here. I mean, you sound so stupid focused on that. It's like if you saw me in a Chevron gas station or a Shell gas station, and I'm gassing up my car so that I can drive my car to do work to advance the people. And you, instead of you seeing that vision, you sitting there criticizing me for going to Chevron or Shell to put gas in my car. That's how you sound to me when you're criticizing me for publishing my book on Amazon. I've written extensively about why I did that. It wasn't my first choice. So do the research and get involved. And if you get involved, you won't have time to ask dumb questions like that. Forward ever, backwards never. We are winning. Stay strong, you all, and have a great rest of your evening.